Welcome back, Mets fans, to another week of Raise the Apple. We have a lot to talk about around Major League Baseball, but first, let's do a quick rundown of our New York Mets. The Mets just came off winning 2 or 3 against the Pirates, shutout last night. Clay Holmes, not his best start. He's given up 1 home run all year, gave up 2 last night, and those two-run homers proved to be the difference. A couple nights ago, Diaz got into some trouble, but Benson doesn't break. Mets are off today before round one of the Subway Series this weekend, where the Mets will head to the Bronx. It has switched the format, so instead of 2-2, it is now 3-3. So 3 games in the Bronx, and then later in the year, 3 games at Citi Field. I am very much looking forward to this. It is Juan Soto's return to the Bronx. I'm sure Yankees fans, being the classy people that they are, will treat him with the utmost respect. But this is going to be a huge series for the Mets right off the bat. So, because you have the Red Sox after this, and then the Dodgers come to Citi Field. So, this is kind of, after having the Cubs and the Diamondbacks, the Mets are really now starting to pick up the teams that they're playing in terms of the difficulty. So, and it's always good. The Mets have won 6 of the last 7 meetings against the Yankees, and it's always good to beat up on the Yankees. So, not much else going on with the Mets. Juan Soto got a casual day off yesterday. Of course, Mets Twitter acted totally rational about it. And the pitching continues to be fantastic. The bullpen's starting to wear a little bit. Nothing concerning, but they are starting to regress just a little bit. The offense was flat last night, but for the most part has been pretty solid overall. Lindor continues to prove why you should put the C on his chest. Pete's been great. Nimmo's starting to turn it on a little bit. If Vientos and Nimmo can keep going, the Mets, if you look at Lindor, Soto, Pete, Nimmo, Vientos, that might be the best 1 through 5 in baseball when they're all going. I know Vientos and Nimmo got off to slow starts. Soto really didn't get off to as slow of a start as people make it out to be. I've said it before. Everyone, because he signed this contract, expected him to, hit 400 with 60 home runs and 200 RBIs. That's never what he's been like. So he's already at the top of the league in walks. He's starting to close the gap on OPS on Pete in terms of the team lead. I mean, by the end of the year, his numbers will be there. I'm not worried. If he's hits 270 with 30 to 40 homers and around 100 RBIs, I don't know how you can be unhappy with that as a Mets fan. It's going to come. His defense has always been the big question mark. His defense is fine, in my opinion. He's had a couple gaffes, but also what major leaguer doesn't have a hiccup here and there defensively? We've seen Pete how many times bail out bad throws from Lindor with incredible picks at first base. So I'm not too overly worried about the quote-unquote lack of production from Juan Soto. I think he's fine, but, Mets fans on Mets Twitter especially like to act totally rational. We're spoiled rotten right now with the richest owner in baseball, have the richest contract in the history of North American sports, and have one of the best records in all of baseball, and there are Mets fans that are still unhappy. So, driving around Major League Baseball, there is 2 things I want to talk about, one of which I feel very passionate about, so that will probably take up the majority of this week's episode, and you guessed it, it is the Pete Rose stuff. But before we get into Pete Rose, we got to talk about 2 manager firings that have already happened. Bud Black of the Colorado Rockies and Derek Shelton of the Pittsburgh Pirates, both fired. We'll start with Derek Shelton. We'll start with Derek Shelton. Both of them, I have very similar takes, in which I don't think firing Derek Shelton and firing Bud Black solves the issue. So let's start with the Pirates. You have arguably the best pitcher in the game in Paul Skeens. You have Jared Jones, Mitch Keller behind him. Brady Falter was pretty solid the other night for the Pirates. And I know Kutch is still there and playing out however much longer he has left in his career, but you have O'Neal Cruz, Cabrian Hayes. You have a nice little young core you're starting to work with, but the ownership just doesn't supplement that. There's already talks that Paul Skeens needs to be traded, and it's just gonna if the Pirates trade Paul Skeens, I don't know how I would respond to that. First of all, if he's going to a contender, if he's getting traded, they're going to give up a lot to get him. But if I'm the Pirates, I have a generational pitcher in Skeens. I have O'Neill Cruz and Brian Hayes. I got our leader in McCutchen to help this young core kind of grow and learn. And you do nothing continuously to help that. And just the way professional sports works, when the performance isn't there, the coaches, head coaches, managers, they're always the scapegoat. Derek Shelton and the Pirates, Derek Shelton has been in charge of the Pirates since I believe the COVID year he took over. And I thought, for the most part, he's done a pretty solid job. Have the Pirates had success? No. Have the Pirates added to the roster to have even a chance at success? Also no. The Pirates have, and it's the same take kind of for the Rockies. The Pirates and the Rockies have had random windows open where they made the playoffs. They didn't go very far, but they got in, and then just didn't do anything to capitalize on it. The Colorado Rockies, I believe it was 17 or 18 got into the playoffs and then did nothing to capitalize on it. We know a couple years ago they tried with the Super Bowl pen, which failed miserably and blew up in their face. And the Rockies, I would argue, are in a worse position than the Pittsburgh. Not argue, they are. They're in a much worse position than the Pirates. Because in Bud Black's case, he's given one of the worst teams of all time. It's not a good look for baseball where in 2023 you had the Oakland A's. 2024 you had the Chicago White Sox. And right now the 2025 Colorado Rockies are on pace to be the worst team of all time. That's 3 straight years that you're looking at a team being the worst of all time. That's not a good look for baseball at all. I just hope that, I don't want to beat a dead horse when it comes to owners and people's complaints with ownership. Like I've said before, Mets fans were pretty spoiled with having Steve Cohen in charge. So, it's like beating a dead horse, but the ownership and front office of the Rockies and of the Pirates has failed so miserably that Derek Shelton and Bud Black take the heat for it. And I hope when the next CBA comes around, I would like to see, I don't know how it would work. This is just me spitballing. I would like to see somehow force the hand of owners a little bit where they have to you can't just own a team and just sit back and kick your feet up. Like, you have to do something. Like, you don't have to spend $1 billion like Steve Cohen does, but you shouldn't be sitting there for an entire off season and make literally 0 moves. There is no way that should be happening if you own a professional sports team. But it's an argument that baseball fans have been preaching forever, and I just don't think it's something that's ever going to change. Although I would like to see it change, and I wouldn't be surprised if Paul Skeens' relationship with the Pirates ends up becoming that. So, but the big topic for today's episode is Pete Rose. It has become a very controversial topic, a topic that I feel very passionately about. So, like I said before, most of this episode is going to be around the Pete Rose discussion. So if you haven't seen, essentially in a nutshell, I'm going to paraphrase what Rob Manfred said. He released a quote earlier this week saying that if a player is on the all-time ban list and they pass away, they are essentially reinstated and are eligible for the Hall of Fame. Most notably on this list is Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson. Also included are the rest of the guys in the Black Sox scandal and a few other players mixed in there. But everyone's focus is on Shoeless Joe Jackson and Pete Rose. No one's really arguing Shoeless Joe Jackson in terms of he should be in the Hall of Fame. I think everyone is kind of in unanimous agreement on that. I thought everyone was in unanimous agreement about Pete Rose being in the Hall of Fame as well. So the TikTok video I made it didn't get any backlash, but it blew up in my face internally. Because part of the video I said that I haven't met anyone who feels, and this is true, I haven't met anyone that feels Pete Rose shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And then when I go on Twitter after the news is released and everyone's spitballing their initial comments about it, there are a lot of people that do not want Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame. A lot of national writers, a lot of big-time names in baseball media do not want Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, which was a surprise to me because I didn't know as much as is out there. So then I did my own personal research. I still feel that Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I like what the other night on the broadcast, Gary and Ron were talking about it. And I like the way Ron Darling put it. And this is how I interpreted what he said. If he meant something completely different by it, come after me, don't go after Ronnie. This is just how I interpreted what he was saying. Essentially, he said that the purpose of the Hall of Fame is to tell the story of baseball. And the story doesn't have to necessarily be a fairy tale, which I thought was the perfect way to put it. Baseball has a lot of great history. It should be celebrated. Baseball also has a lot of horrible history. And it's not something that should be celebrated, but it's also not something we should sit there and ignore and pretend it never happened. We need to acknowledge it happened and move on from it. For example, look at the Jackie Robinson era in Major League Baseball, where when Jackie Robinson first came into the league, how the stories we know of how horrible he was treated, and as other black players started coming into the league, how horrible they were treated. It's not something that, it's a bad part of baseball history, but it's not something we should ignore, if that makes sense. I may have worded that really weird, but we shouldn't just pretend, that didn't happen. We're just going to move on with a clean slate. No, you can't do that with history. That's not how history works. History is history. There's good history, there's bad history. It's all history, no matter which way you try and spin it. So when it comes to Pete Rose, the issue of gambling, at the time, and it still is, but at the time, gambling was against the rules of Major League Baseball. Was it wrong? Yes. Should he have been disciplined? Yes. Should it have been a lifetime ban? That, I think, I'm on the fence with that because players have done a lot worse that did not get a lifetime ban. So I don't really know. I kind of know, but don't know where I stand on that, if in a nutshell. But he was put on the ban list for gambling. Fast forward to, I want to say 2004, 2005-ish. He comes out with his autobiography, essentially admits to gambling. Gambling on other teams, gambling on his team to win. He essentially admitted it. Although way back then, it was all speculation. There was reason to believe. And then he just formally came out and was like, yeah, I did it. Fast forward again, around 2017-ish. Allegations came forward against Pete Rose in the sexual assault realm. Pete Rose didn't deny it, but didn't admit to it. He took kind of the no answer is my answer approach, where essentially he said, oh, it was 50 years ago, like, I'm not worried about that. Which some people took as admission of guilt. Some people took it as him being an asshole and blowing it off, like it was nothing. That situation itself is a whole nother that incident with him is a whole nother conversation, completely unrelated, completely separate. The biggest thing with the Hall of Fame and what could keep Pete Rose out and what kept Curt Schilling out and what could keep multiple players out in the future is the quote-unquote character clause. Now, in Curt Schilling's case, Curt Schilling likes to talk a lot on social media. Whether you agree with his views on stuff or you disagree, he's very vocal about it, and that is what has held him out of the Hall of Fame. Pete Rose is facing a similar thing. His numbers, he's a Hall of Famer. I don't think anyone's denying that. From a number standpoint, he is a Hall of Famer. Character clause is the big question mark because he also is very vocal about his opinions. Quick sidebar. I can only imagine Pete Rose's Hall of Fame induction speech. I could totally imagine just being him bashing on Major League Baseball for the entirety. That would be hysterical. Anyway, the character clause is going to be the question with Pete Rose. Now, I've heard a lot of different takes on this, whether it's, just because past guys were horrible people and were put in the Hall of Fame doesn't mean we should keep it going, and vice versa, and it's a whole mess. It's a whole mess. But I'm in the realm of, I believe you are innocent until proven guilty. Was Pete Rose proven guilty in a court of law? No. Now, if he's proven guilty in a court of law, if he's proven not guilty in a court of law, does that change things? I think for a lot of people, that changes things. A lot of people are so set in their ways that no matter what happens, even if he's proven not guilty, they're still going to dismiss him just because of the allegations. The same thing is happening right now with Trevor Bauer. Even though he was proven not guilty in a court of law, people still have their heels dug in about Trevor Bauer. And the same thing is with Pete Rose right now. I think that changes a lot of, obviously, given almost 60 years ago now, I don't think that's going to end up happening where we find out from a court of law standpoint if Pete Rose is innocent or guilty of those allegations. But I use my counter with the character clause. I don't understand. Now, I'm not comparing Pete Rose's allegations and PED use as the same thing. They are two very different things. What I think normal people would agree, one thing is much worse than the other, much worse of a situation. But I'm talking about the general synopsis of the character clause. So my confusion with people is you want to use the character clause on Pete Rose because he's a horrible human being. But you don't want to use the character clause on proven PED cheaters who have ruined the integrity of the game, who cheated to get to the way they are in terms of their performance. The general purpose of the character clause is you are saying that you have the numbers and the talent to be in the Hall of Fame. But with the character clause, you're an asshole, or you were accused of this, or you were proven convicted of this XYZ, list whatever awful thing you want. I would argue that from a character clause standpoint and what it means, you can't argue, to me at least, you can't argue that Pete Rose is a horrible human being because of his off-the-field issues, and he shouldn't be getting into the Hall of Fame, when also advocating for guys who have proven PED, not alleged, proven PED users, who ruined the integrity of the game, who lied their entire careers, advocating for them to get into the Hall of Fame. And again, PEDs, using PEDs, and the off-the-field issues that Pete Rose is accused of are two separate things. Those themselves are very separate things. I'm not comparing, they're equal, cheating and domestic violence or sexual assault stuff. I'm not saying they're equal. I'm talking about the general purpose of the character clause. You can't pick and choose when you want to play the character clause card. I think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I saw a lot of people have said no. Bob Nightingale made a story that it was a dark day for baseball, that it sets a bad precedent. What sets a bad precedent is in today's game, when you have a guy like Marcell Ozuna who has a DUI, who has allegations of domestic violence, you slap him with an 80-game suspension, and then he can come back and it's perfectly fine. Or any other player that gets in trouble with domestic violence. You suspend them for 80 games or you suspend them for a season, whatever the case is, and then they come back and they're totally fine. You have the Houston Astros scandal, which, not to bring it up again because I'm over the Houston Astros scandal, but none of the players were punished, and Rob Manfred's response was essentially, well, they have to face the public, so that's their punishment. The precedent's already been set. with allowing people with off the field issues to continue to succeed in Major League Baseball. Now, should that change, or should that be what's going forward? That's a whole nother discussion. But to me, from what the character clause means, I find it hard to justify you can't have Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame because of off the field issues, but you can have other guys like the steroid guys who have off the field issues into the Hall of Fame. I don't know how you can tell the story of baseball without Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, the all-time hits king. I don't know. It's the same thing with Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds never failed a drug test, to my knowledge. From all the research I've done, from all the reading I've done about it, Barry Bonds never failed a drug test. How do you tell this game of baseball without Barry Bonds being in the Hall of Fame? Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, they got their plaques, or not plaques, their bats, or jerseys, or balls, or pictures, whatever. The plaque is different. To me, at least. There's the museum, and then there's the plaques. When I look at those plaques, in my head, this is my personal opinion, and anyone who thinks that Pete Rose shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, I respect that. Respectfully, I disagree, though. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't think less of you. I don't think you're an idiot because you think Pete Rose should stay out of the Hall of Fame. I respectfully disagree. But when I look at those plaques in the Hall of Fame, I went there almost 2 summers ago was the last time I was there. When I look at those plaques, I think these are the greatest players to ever step between the lines. Now, there are stories with Ty Cobb where he was a racist and a horrible human being and this and that and the other thing. And I'm sure there are plenty of other Hall of Famers from that time period that fall in that same realm. I'm not thinking about, maybe that's just the baseball nerd in me. I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about, hey, this is one of the greatest players to ever pick up a bat, to ever throw a baseball. I'm looking at the baseball side of it, and maybe I'm being closed-minded, maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that. I'm looking at it as, wow, these guys are the best of the best. That's just my personal opinion on it. Again, I respectfully disagree with people who think that Pete Rose should be out of the Hall of Fame, but I think he should be in there, and that's pretty much all I got on that. Long tangent. I could go on forever and ever about it. Pete Rose is baseball. I knew that I know it's a lifetime ban. It's for life. But I knew as soon as he passed away that Major League Baseball was going to come up with something that was going to enable Pete Rose to be eligible for the Hall of Fame. So, but now he has to wait until December of 2027. Not the baseball writers, so I misspoke in my TikTok video. Not the baseball writers. There is a modern era committee or something to that effect that will take the vote on Pete Rose. I've seen a lot of people that have said they'll lose respect for the Hall of Fame. My respect for the writers, or the voters, is already gone. And I don't do that as a whole. I do that on an individual basis. So the writers that submit blank ballots that think they're proving a point, or they're not voting for anyone until Barry Bonds gets in, or they're only voting for steroid guys, or they're whatever statement they're trying to make, those guys I don't have any respect for. I mean, if you have a Hall of Fame vote, it is one of the highest honors probably in the baseball world you could have. If I ever had that opportunity, I'm not wasting it making a statement like that. It's not my place. I'm not nearly important enough to be trying to make a statement like that. But everyone has their own opinions on it. I personally think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. But we'll find out come December of 2027 where that ends up being and where he falls in that. My gut tells me he gets in. My gut tells me he gets in, and Major League Baseball faces a huge backlash from it. If he doesn't get in, I think baseball still gets backlash from it, but I don't think nearly as much backlash as if Pete Rose gets in. So we're going to have to wait and see on that one. But that's going to wrap it up pretty much for this week's episode of Raise the Apple. Mets are doing great. Not much to complain about in Metland. A lot going on around the league, though. You have Roki Sasaki on the IL, the Orioles, who maybe next week we'll talk a little more, whatever the hell's going on with them. You had 2 manager firings already, and Pete Rose has been the center of baseball for this week. Big conversation piece, and time will only tell on that one. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you for tuning in this week. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Make sure you follow on TikTok, follow on Twitter, like, comment, share, all that good stuff. And we will see you next week. Hopefully the Mets can keep it rolling and show the Yankees who the real kings of New York are. So stay tuned for that, and let's go Mets.